Sign it right now, Claire, or I'll tell the police you emptied the company account yourself. My father slammed the confession paper onto the kitchen table while two officers waited just outside the front door. My younger brother Mason sat frozen beside him, red-eyed, barely breathing. I was still wearing my warehouse uniform, dirt on my hands from a double shift, and somehow everyone in that room was looking at me like I was already guilty. Dad kept saying the same thing over and over. Your brother has a future. You can survive this. $42,000 had vanished from his construction business that morning. Mason had suddenly started spending money he couldn't explain, and yet my father wouldn't let the officers search his room. Then one detective stepped inside and asked a question that made the room go silent. Mr. Bennett, why was the missing money transferred through an account connected to your daughter? I turned toward my father, and that's when he quietly slid Mason's second phone into his pocket. I saw it disappear into his jacket like a reflex. Fast. Practiced. The detective didn't notice, but I did. My stomach dropped because for the first time that night, I realized Dad wasn't confused or desperate. He was controlling the room. Claire had access to payroll, he answered immediately. Too quickly. She handled invoices sometimes. That's not true, I snapped. Dad's eyes locked onto mine so hard it shut me up mid-sentence. Not angry, warning me. My mother stood near the sink, gripping a dish towel with both hands, staring at the floor like if she stayed quiet long enough, this would somehow disappear. Mason still wouldn't look at me. He just kept rubbing his palms against his jeans over and over. One of the officers stepped farther inside. Miss Bennett, we need a clear answer. Did you transfer company funds into your personal account? No, it came out instantly. Because I knew I didn't do it. But the second I answered, Dad shoved the paper closer to me. Claire, he said quietly like he was trying to help me. Think carefully before this becomes permanent. Permanent. That word hit harder than the threat. I looked at the document. Typed confession. Signature line already highlighted. He had prepared this before I even got home. My chest tightened. Mason, I said, finally turning toward him. Tell them the truth. For a second, I thought he would. His lips parted, his eyes filled with tears. Then Dad cut in. If your brother gets charged with felony theft, his scholarships are gone. His life is over. He pointed at me. You're stronger than he is. I actually laughed for a second because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You want me to go to jail for him? Dad leaned closer across the table. No, he whispered. I want this family to survive. Outside, red and blue lights flashed through the living room curtains. One officer picked up his radio. We may need to bring both siblings in. That changed everything. Dad's expression hardened instantly. And for the first time in my life, I realized my father wasn't asking me anymore. He had already decided who was expendable. Then Mason finally spoke, barely above a whisper. Please, Claire, and he slid the pen toward me. Nobody came to see me for 11 days. Not my mother, not Mason, not even my father after everything he promised me that night. I sat alone inside a gray interview room at County Holding, staring at the cheap clock bolted to the wall while my public defender flipped through my file like she'd already handled 20 cases exactly like mine that week. You signed a confession, she said flatly. That makes this difficult. I wanted to tell her why I signed it. I wanted to explain the pressure, the threats, the way my father looked at me like I was disposable the second police walked through the door. But every time I started talking, I heard Mason's voice again. Please, Claire. Meanwhile, life outside kept moving without me. Dad hired a private attorney for Mason within 48 hours. My brother returned to school before the week ended. And around town, people started repeating the same story Richard Bennett carefully fed them. Claire stole from the family business. Former coworkers stopped answering my calls. One manager told me customers felt uncomfortable around me. Even my boyfriend texted me saying maybe my father had been protecting the company. That hurt more than the arrest. Then, 3 weeks into my sentence hearing process, someone unexpected sat across from me in the visitation area. An older woman with silver-streaked hair and a thick legal folder under her arm. Naomi Carter, she said. I review questionable financial cases for a legal aid nonprofit. I frowned. Why mine? She opened the folder slowly. Because your father reported missing money before the transfer was even completed. I blinked. What? Naomi leaned forward. And because somebody removed the office surveillance footage the same night you supposedly committed the theft. For the first time since my arrest, somebody looked at me like they believed me. Then Naomi slid a printed bank record across the table. There's one more thing, she said quietly. The money didn't stop in your account. I looked down at the final transfer destination. I had never seen the account name before in my life. 2 years later, I was finally starting to breathe again. Not fully, but enough to sleep through most nights without hearing my father's voice in my head. I lived in Naomi Carter's guest house on the edge of town, worked mornings at a bookkeeping office, and spent every night studying accounting textbooks at her kitchen table. Naomi said understanding financial systems was the only way people like my father stopped controlling the story. Numbers expose people, she liked to say. I wanted to believe her. Then one rainy Thursday morning, everything cracked open again. Naomi walked into the kitchen holding a thick manila envelope. No return address, she said. Inside were dozens of printed financial records from Richard Bennett Construction. Payroll sheets, tax filings, wire transfers, fake subcontractor invoices. My stomach tightened as Naomi spread the documents across the table. This wasn't simple theft, she muttered. The record showed money disappearing from company accounts for years. Small amounts at first, then larger ones. Hundreds of thousands routed through shell accounts tied to fake employees. And suddenly, the $42,000 made horrifying sense. It was never the real crime. It was the distraction. Naomi stopped at one page and looked up at me carefully. Claire, Mason accessed these files before the money disappeared. I froze. What are you saying? I think your brother discovered what your father was doing. Before I could answer, Naomi pulled out the final document from the envelope. A shipping receipt, sent 2 days earlier, signed with only one name, Mason. Then Naomi's phone rang. She answered once, and her expression immediately changed. What do you mean he's missing? My father smiled when they arrested him. That was the first thing I noticed walking into the federal courthouse 5 years after he forced me to sign that confession. Richard Bennett stepped through the courtroom doors in an expensive navy suit, hands cuffed in front of him, acting more annoyed than afraid. Reporters crowded the hallway outside. Former employees sat along the back wall whispering to each other. And then he saw me. The smile vanished instantly. He actually stopped walking. For a second, nobody moved. Not the marshals beside him, not the attorneys organizing files, not even the judge's clerk, because according to the public story, I was supposed to be ruined. Not sitting behind the prosecution table beside Naomi Carter. Dad recovered fast, but I caught it. That flash of panic. The prosecution opened with financial charts projected across courtroom screens, fake subcontractors, hidden payroll accounts, years of tax fraud routed through shell companies. One forensic accountant explained how the missing $42,000 had been intentionally redirected through my account after the transfer already occurred, meaning my confession should never have held up in court. Naomi handed prosecutors the recovered banking metadata months earlier. My conviction had already been overturned quietly before the trial began. Dad kept shaking his head through the testimony. None of this proves coercion, his attorney argued. Then prosecutors revealed the second phone. The same phone I watched Dad hide in his jacket that night. Investigators recovered encrypted banking access records from it after tracing offshore account activity connected to the company fraud. Years of hidden transactions were sitting inside that device the entire time. And suddenly, every moment from that kitchen came rushing back into my head. Dad wasn't protecting Mason. He was protecting himself. Then the prosecutor asked the question everyone had waited years to hear. Where is Mason Bennett now? The courtroom doors opened behind me. I turned around and my brother walked inside under federal escort. Mason looked older than I remembered. Not just physically, tired older. Like he'd spent years carrying something too heavy to put down. The entire courtroom went silent as he took the witness stand. My father stared at him without blinking, his jaw tightening harder with every step Mason took toward the microphone. For a moment, I honestly thought Mason might still protect him. Then the prosecutor asked one question. Why did your sister confess to a crime she didn't commit? Mason swallowed hard. Because my father told her to. You could actually hear people shifting in their seats behind us. Mason explained everything carefully. Years earlier, he accidentally discovered hidden payroll files while using Dad's office computer for school printing. Fake employees, duplicate tax records, payments moving through accounts tied to dead subcontractors. At first, he thought it was accounting mistakes. Then Dad caught him looking. After that, everything changed. Dad started monitoring him constantly, taking his phone, locking office files, warning him that if investigators ever audited the company, the entire family would be destroyed. Mason admitted he stole the $42,000 because he planned to disappear with evidence proving the fraud existed. But before he could leave town, Dad found out the money was missing, so he created a new plan. Blame me. Shift the investigation toward family theft before anyone examined the company itself. And the worst part? Mason confessed that the anonymous records Naomi received years later came from him. I tried to fix it, he said quietly, finally looking at me. I just waited too long. I didn't even realize I was crying until Naomi handed me a tissue. My father never looked at me once during the rest of the testimony. By the end of the trial, Richard Bennett was convicted on fraud, tax evasion, witness intimidation, and coercion charges. The judge openly condemned him for sacrificing his own daughter to protect himself financially. 3 months later, my conviction was fully erased. People who ignored me suddenly wanted to apologize. Relatives called, pretending they always doubted my guilt. Former coworkers sent messages saying they were glad the truth came out. Most of them never got responses. Because the truth was, losing everything had changed me permanently, but not entirely for the worse. I finished my accounting certifications and eventually joined Naomi's investigative firm full-time, helping uncover financial fraud cases almost identical to my father's. And 6 months after the trial, I returned to our old family house one last time before the bank repossessed it. The kitchen still looked smaller than I remembered. Same table, same overhead light, same spot where my father slid that confession toward me and decided my life was worth less than his secrets. I took the old house key from my pocket, placed it in the center of the table, and walked out without looking back.